everybody, welcome back to The Hobby Musician. Today I want to take you with me into a piece that I've recently incorporated into my practice routine that has really reignited my fascination with my love of arpeggios. Now don't worry, if you're still brand new to that term, an arpeggio is a kind of a standalone musical idea or a technique that has two main components. Number one, arpeggios are truly selections of notes. You're kind of intentionally picking notes, and the basis that you're using to pick them is you're primarily using a chord that's been constructed and picking the notes out of that chord to play. The second component is there is sort of a rhythmic pattern. Now, if you were just playing the notes in a chord, we wouldn't have a special name for it, right? So playing a chord or when a guitar player strums it or a piano player hits all of them, that's the idea of just chords. But if you add in a rhythmic, it doesn't have to be too fast or slow, but sort of one note at a time. If you have a distinct moment where you're playing these notes, that combined with the selection that they're also all notes out of a chord is really where we get this idea of arpeggios. So you can kind of hear this if you're listening to a band play and they really want to bring it down and play a ballad or get really emotional at a point. The acoustic guitar might come out and start finger picking, and you kind of hear something, something along the lines of like this, like. Right there, you're hearing sort of both of those kind of conditions happening at the same time. The band or the player might be trying to play that A major chord, but they're choosing to play the notes one at a time in a rhythmic pattern, kind of all near each other, so you hear the chord by the end, but it's slightly different. Now, I do want to say that these things are flexible. So these ideas, you don't have to play the notes in exactly, up, and then down like I did there. You can play them in any order. You can also sort of play with how fast or how slow you play them. But in the end, this idea of arpeggios is kind of a very unique musical technique, and I've really, really been enjoying it in this particular piece. Now, which piece did I pick? Well, this is a classic. And by classic, I mean classical. We're going way back. This is a piece by Johann Sebastian Bach, or Bach, if you're fancy. And it's just titled Prelude in G major. And I know, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I don't have all the classical music titles memorized. What are you talking about? Well, the funny thing is, lots of people probably are already familiar with this piece, and you might not even know it. If you've ever seen like a TV show or a movie where there's a scene that the characters are going to a fancy restaurant or they're going to like some glamorous event, and if there's music playing in the background, there's a handful of classical pieces that a director might choose. And as it turns out, this piece is so popular, has been around for so long, that a lot of times it gets put into shows and movies. So what I want to do now is I want to play the first 4 bars of it. I'm going to slow it down, play the first 4 bars. It might kind of trigger some memories, and then we're going to break down what's going on and how those arpeggios are being used. And then at the end, I'll go ahead and play like a full arrangement of the piece. So if you want to skip ahead to that, I don't blame you. Just use the chapters down below and you can click into that. But here's what we're going to hear in the first 4 bars of this piece by Bach. So hopefully right there, maybe that's kind of sparking some memories. You're like, oh, I think I've heard something like that. Well, also, in just those first 4 bars, I think it's a really good demonstration of how you can use this one idea, this idea of an arpeggio, and weave some really cool musical ideas. So let's start breaking down the very first measure. The first note we hear is this low G. And it's called Prelude in G major, so we might expect that very first chord, that first measure, we're going to be outlining the notes in a G major scale, primarily. So we have that G as our first note. The second note we hear is a D. But although it's the second note we heard, I said earlier, we don't necessarily have to follow rules of playing arpeggios in any particular order. Well, as it turns out, the D is the fifth tone in a G major scale. And if you remember kind of other parts of music theory, to construct a chord, you just have to selectively choose the notes that would make that chord. And as it turns out, to make a major chord, we need the first tone, the third tone, and the fifth tone, a 1, a 3, and a 5. So the first note we hear is the 1, and then we hear the 5 being played second. Well, then we jump up. The third note we hear is the third tone. So we're hearing a 1, a 5, and a 3. The 3 is that B note, which is the third of a G major scale. Well, the last note that's included is this kind of alternation. You kind of hear that. It's going from the third tone down to the second tone. And this is a unique way. Again, you can kind of look at this any number of ways, but one possible way you could look at this is by switching to the second tone from the third. It's one technique of suspending a chord. Now, you can suspend a chord by going from the third note up to the fourth, or from the third note down to the second. But if you move away from the third and then you come back to the third, you're suspending and resolving, suspending and resolving. And by alternating, what Bach is doing, or what's one way of kind of creating some tension and then resolving it in a very short amount of time. Now, what's going on in the second measure? Well, when I hear this, my ear is kind of thinking, oh, it almost sounds like we're moving somewhere. We're going to some other place. And in fact, if we kind of break down the notes, we sort of are. When we go to the second measure, we hear, and if we kind of look at what those notes are and what they could construct, we start to see a C major scale, or a C major chord, excuse me. So that first note is still G, but if we were to look at the notes that would construct a C major, if we started looking at the C major scale itself, starting on a C for the 1, the fifth, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth note of that C major scale is G. So there's our fifth. Well, the second note that we play is an E. And an E is the third note with relation to C. So we're playing the fifth tone, the third tone, and that third note we play is the octave. That's the C. So we really are building up a C major scale, a C major chord, and we're hitting that C later in the measure. Now we are kind of alternating from the C down a half step. Now, again, using music theory, we could kind of define that chord. That note, this B note here, is the major 7 of the C chord. So we're kind of we're just staying in the C major 7 zone. Well, what do we do in the third measure? We're going away from C back to G. We start again, we hit this G, and now we're using the major 7 of the G scale to sort of play G major 7. The fourth and final bar, we're kind of removing the major 7 and we're really finally getting back to this G major. So there's been this movement. We play our G, we play an octave G, and then we're back to this third, second, like we heard in the first measure. So already in 4 bars, Bach has been able to kind of take us on this arpeggio journey through a couple different chords. And underlying all of it, I just want to bring your attention to this. The second note of every single measure plays this line. In the first measure, we hear a D. In the second measure, we hear an E. In the third measure, we hear an F sharp. And in the fourth measure, we hear a G. So we're hearing that line is being played as we're listening to these arpeggios. So bringing it all back, I just really have been fascinated with this, and this piece in particular has helped me kind of rediscover the power and the musical, interest that you can really get out of incorporating arpeggios into your lines and your music. So as you listen to this piece, I want you to keep your ears out for all of the different places throughout the whole thing where Bach kind of returns to this and weaves in some cool musical ideas. So right now, I do need to get the camera switched up. I'm going to put on some gratuitous over-the-top effects like reverb and delay to really make it sound ambient. So I hope you got something out of this video. Thank you, as always, for watching. And until next time, play on, my friends. Play on.